Hype is destroying car prices. Last video, a lot of people were expecting me to talk about this in that video, but that video I titled it because it was about people talking about all the new cars they're hyped for, then getting disappointed over the smallest of things. So that one is still titled correctly, I stand by that. But then this video, we're actually going to talk about what people requested. Well, I'm going to mainly focus on our import JDM tuner prices, but just know that that example works for more or less the rest of the car community, but they're probably one of the worst examples of it. In this video that I made where I talked about a lot of old Japanese cars, and I actually kept track of their prices, and as well as Car Goose has this fantastic tool you can use where you can compare prices of vehicles through time. You can factually and statistically see that their prices have gone up way further than the usual amount of inflation. So this isn't just, oh, this is just inflation. Go check out that video if you haven't already. It'll help you understand this one more actually. Ultimately though, it comes down to sentimental value. So it's gonna be, each person is they're gonna still want to buy some of these cars. Some of them will, because their sentimental value for it may exceed the current monetary value. But the very few outliers who are stupid enough to make that decision should not have so much power on the overall market. What unfortunately happens is when one of these freaking fanboys buys like a car for a ludicrous price, all the dealerships as well as all the people who list these cars privately start to chase that golden goose. A good example of this happened with a Nissan Silvia. When a Silvia sold for 100, I think it was like 104 grand, it basically sold for 6 figures. A Silvia, not even a Skyline. All of a sudden dealerships thought Silvias were minimum worth like $25,000 cars, and some crazy ones even start asking $50,000 because they're like, well, look at this one that sold for $100,000. Why should we sell this car for 7 or 10 or 15,000? This one sold for 100. This is a 50 grand car minimum. So they start selling it for 50 grand, and even private sales, you could find the most trashed, beat up old S chassis and people would still want 15, 20, 25 grand for them. Then dealers want 40 and 50 grand for them. And then you got the ones who are doing the golden goose chase where they're like, someone will even pay 70 or 80. If someone paid 100 once, and someone might even pay 100 again. So then some of them may even try to list it as 100 grand, which all because of one outlier. And that outlier does attract, it spawns several other hype markets because it is hype. One person buys it that high, people want one up the other person. So let's talk about dealerships first off. New car dealerships are scary, sure, but they're not as scary, and I'm going to explain 2 reasons why. The first reason is they have manufacturer directives that they have to follow. For example, MSRP, manufacturer suggested retail price. A lot of new car dealerships are also part of a mainline brand. For example, Chevrolet works under GM, Honda's Honda, so on and so forth. Because they have that much corporate funding, they also have their own banks for their dealerships, like GM has GM Financial. These banks also even have some government regulations on them because they're big enough where the government can watch them and see them easier. So they aren't as willing to give horrendous APR and ripoffs. And now this brings me to used car dealerships, or more importantly, independent car dealerships, because when you buy a lot of these old JDM tuners, they're obviously being sold by used car dealerships or importers or whatever. And these independent run dealerships, well, in my APR video, a lot of people were talking about them like this in my comments, and I should call them this too. They're loan sharks. They will gladly play around with this hype train. They will gladly take your money. The reality is they don't care about you. They can try to put up a front that they're ran by car guys for car guys, but when they sit you down and make you guys sign 29% APR on a 30-year-old car, that's not what car guys do to fellow car guys. A fellow car guy like myself will tell you right now that you should watch the finance video that I made because it will teach you how to not be stupid, because a lot of clout boys walk right into this scam, especially with old JDM cars. It's not just the Challenger and Charger and the Nissan Altima boys, it's a lot of old JDM fanboys who cannot actually afford their cars because, shocking, a lot of these cars are Supercar prices. That's also why they become super defensive of it, because it becomes their whole personality and it becomes their whole everything. When you spend everything to get it, then it in turn becomes your everything. That's part of the reason why I don't care all that much about my Corvette when people try to meme about it to me, because I'm like, I barely talk about it on this channel and people still watch my videos, and I love that because it means people come for me as a person more so than a stupid freaking Corvette in the background. And sure, I adore that stupid freaking Corvette, but it doesn't construct my entire personality because I didn't spend everything I have in my life to get it. Therefore, I don't feel like it's everything in my life. But when someone does that for a car, that's why they become super defensive. It's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome, basically. They're literally trapped and jailed by the decisions of this, and they actually become more obedient because of it. So unfortunately, because these people can't actually afford these old JDM cars, what ends up happening is that when they buy these cars, can't afford to fix it when it breaks, or they do something stupid and try to modify it right away and then it breaks, it ends up rotting away and and when this happens, this makes the cars become even more expensive. So basically the supply of them goes down and the demand for them still remains very high. So these cars, the tuner argument, or rather the supercar slayer argument, is just straight up invalid now. If you're spending supercar prices to buy the car, then you're also going to spend supercar prices to fix the car and then get it custom modified, because yes, you have to fix most of these cars before you modify them now. But what I'm trying to get across is that by the time you spent all your time and money doing that, you really would be better off buying a supercar. And I know someone's going to laugh, like, I don't want a mainstream Lambo, but that's not the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that, doesn't that literally defeat one of the biggest appeals of these cars? Like, money isn't a joke. That makes a huge difference to people. In the old days, the reason we loved a lot of these cars is because you could buy some of them between 20 to 40 grand, like high-end models. Like, you get turbo Supras for like 30 grand back in the day when no one really cared or knew what they were other than a few car guys. All the companies and aftermarket tuners are ready and there, and they still are open and they still make parts for it, as well as the OEM suppliers. They still make parts for it, they still ship it on time, and they still sell the parts cheap. These were cars that you could buy for cheap, modify for cheap, and absolutely kick butt with, and that's what made them heroic. That's why people cheered when Supras passed Corvettes, when they passed supercars like Ferraris and Lambos. Nowadays, if you line up a Supra next to a Corvette and it passes it, I'm like, well, that's because that Supra has like $140,000 of value into it. Of course it's going to beat the $50,000 Corvette. It's not impressive anymore because now the Supra, in a sense, has kind of become the expected winner. And it also, ironically, has become the very car it was designed to slay itself. It used to be a supercar slayer. And even if we don't go all the way to the world of supercars, there are just a whole bunch of other cars now that you can still buy for cheaper, including Japanese cars. Like, you can buy a new Mark V Supra and push it just, okay, I'm literally gonna get burned at the stake for saying that, but you could push a Mark V Supra and probably have more enjoyment. Yes, you might not get the super crazy power figures that you could on a Mark IV, not immediately at least, because the knowledge of the Mark V is still rather new. But the reality is you can buy it out of the box right now. It will be new for cheaper than a Mark IV, and it's going to be more reliable, because I mean reliable in the sense that the newer Supra is going to have a warranty still. More importantly, Toyota still, I think they still quality tested it to like 120k miles, right? Hear me out. Time! Guys, it's been 30 years! Car engines don't magically stay the same from when they came out. If you have a stock Mark IV Supra, and I have friends who have stock Mark IV Supras and stock FD-RX-7s, and they're dynoing their cars around 200 wheel to maybe 230, but a lot of these cars are making south of 230 because they literally have aged, so you're not even getting the stock numbers on them. I have to drill that through some of you fanboys' head. You're gonna get a 3,000 something pound vehicle, and it's gonna move slow, and you guys are paying 6 figures for some of them and expecting it to be god tier destroyers. And again, back in the day, all the movies you grew up watching, all the video games you ended up playing, the beauty of these cars is them as a modded platform. And back then it made sense to mod them. When you can buy FD-RX-7s for 20 grand used, when you could buy Mark IV Supra turbo models, by the way, for 30 or 40 grand used, this made sense. Modifying them was very cheap because purchasing them was still very cheap. But now you're spending 6 figures on a car that barely even runs, doesn't even make its stock horsepower anymore. It doesn't matter if it only has 100,000 miles on it. It's going to drive like it has 400,000 miles on it because it's so old and it hasn't been moving in a long period of time. So you should not modify it right out of the box. If you want a car that you can modify right out of the box, and if you want a car that drives like new, then yes, the new Supra would do that. So the whole old Supras can make it to 300k argument, that works if you continuously drove it from the day it was bought. But if it constantly changes hands and ownerships and sometimes doesn't even move for a long period of times, and also it just wears down, because remember, when non-car people own these cars, like that grandma who just use it as a daily, they don't take the perfect best care of it, they just take regular care of it because it's just a car to them. And that means the car will have a lot of its parts age even more prematurely, which means, you know, I guess what I'm trying to get through people's head is that 2JZs or RB26s or whatever JDM engine you jizz over are not invincible engines. Time will wear them down. Nothing is invincible to the passing of time. They've been worn down by it. Even if you replace all the engine components, the block itself is old. And even though people say they are 300k mileage engines, they mean they can make it there. But if they haven't already made it there, after all this time has passed and they've been abused by several owners, haven't been taken care of, you know, the reality is you got the bad luck of the draw. In that functional sense, I'm not scared to say that modern day GTRs and modern day Supras are actually more reliable, because from a functional standpoint, out of the box as is, there is less worries and less problems to care for new cars compared to old cars. There are the few old cars that are perfect, that will make it to 300k miles, that have been babied by car owners. Don't joke around with me. You already know those are the six-figure ones. Those are the ones that are very exclusive and trading hands at ridiculous prices. Those aren't the ones that most people can afford, and by the time they're looking at those ones, like I said, they can just buy a newer version of that car, even if it breaks their old fanboy JDM heart. If you like cars and car content, please subscribe, please like this video to boost in the algorithm, and more importantly, go check out some of my other videos. I talked about this one the entire video. That APR video, it is truly the biggest scam car guys are falling for. It's a legal scam. I have no good words for it. Yeah, if you want to learn more about cars or the kind of community that surrounds cars, go check out my other content. Other than that, thank you for watching. Blade Angel out.